Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub, and there are profound concerns in the American Jewish community about anti-Israel movements, which are fueled by a pernicious anti-Semitism. This is especially true in the halls of academia, on college and university campuses throughout the United States, where the BDS movement, the coordinated effort to get administrations to boycott, divest from, and sanction Israel, is in full swing. For Jewish college students, the anti-Israel movements on campus can be particularly troubling, even painful. Every American Jew should know what the letters SJP stand for: Students for Justice in Palestine. Jews love justice. Young, idealistic Jewish college students, of course, love justice, which is why Students for Justice in Palestine has attracted a good number of Jews who know virtually nothing about the actual facts on the ground in Israel or on the West Ridge or in Gaza. Nor do they know that SJP was founded by Hatem Bazian, who labels any student supporting Israel a racist and defines justice for Palestine to be the elimination of the Jewish state of Israel. SJP is not a noble attempt to improve Israeli treatment of Palestinians. SJP is a venal movement to destroy a nation state of the United Nations, the Jewish state of Israel. But the real damage being done by SJP and by academics who preach the evils of Zionism and of Israel is the Jewish students who support the state of Israel. They can be victims of bullying by other students. They can be denied their free right to free speech. They can be given lower grades. And at times, they can even experience physical assault. And what may be worst of all, these Jewish students feel helpless. They don't have the facts about Israel's extraordinary inclusion of Palestinian Israelis into Israeli life, nor can they refute the anti-Semitic canards concerning Israel's actions on the West Ridge, often by the IDF. And they often feel alone, that there's no group or community standing with them. Well, the good news is that there are efforts to help college-bound Jewish students to be prepared to have the knowledge and the emotional support they'll need when they go off to school. And one of the most creative of these efforts is a relatively new organization designed for Jewish teens called Club Z, Z for Zionist. Club Z describes itself on its website as offering a multifaceted education on Israel, Jewish identity, and Zionism by grounding modern-day headlines in centuries-old history. And recently, as part of a campaign with the hashtag End Jew Hatred, Club Z was successful in a group effort to get Zoom to cancel a webinar by one of the PLO's most high-profile terrorists, Leila Khaled, who first came into the public spotlight because of her role in the hijacking of TWA Flight 840 in August of 1969. Some of you may remember that hijacking and how 2 hostages were held for 2 months, as well as for her activities as a member of the terrorist group Black September, which was responsible for the heinous murder of 11 Israeli athletes at the 1972 Summer Olympics in Munich. Again, Club Z was one of a number of Jewish organizations led by the Lawfare Project, which convinced Zoom to cancel Leila Khaled's planned webinar with college students. And I am most pleased to be joined now by the woman responsible for the creation of Club Z for students from the 8th grade through the 12th grade, Masha Merkulova, founder and executive director of Club Z. Masha, mazal tov on your work with high school students and teens, and thank you so much for joining us on L'chaim.
Thank you, Mark. I'm so honored to be here. I've been a fan for many years and have watched interviews with now my friends, and I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
Well, it is most lovely to have you. Masha, I want to begin by talking a little bit about you, then we'll go to Club Z. But to talk about you and your Jewish background, obviously you have a Russian name, Masha. Where were you born and what was your family like growing up?
Well, I was born in a good old deceased Soviet Union.
Yes.
I was born in the city of Minsk, and the one and only identity that I grew up with was that of a Soviet citizen. None other identities existed. In fact, I didn't realize that I was Jewish until I was 16 years old. When you're 16 years old in Soviet Union, you go to the passport office and the passport lady is going to give you your passport. Now you are full citizen with all the benefits, don't know of any, and responsibilities. And in my application, I put Russian because that's what was written in all of my school rosters. Another fun fact, in Soviet Union, all of the pupils' nationalities were known to their teachers. It was literally your last name, your first name, your grades, and then on the right side of the roster, it says your nationality. So I've always been written as a Russian.
Yes.
And I wrote Russian, and she looked at me, she smiled, and she goes, "Do you realize that you're Jewish?" And I go, "I'm Jewish?" And she goes, "Have you ever thought that your mom's name is Rivki?" And honestly, this is a good reminder for anybody who works with teens. Connecting the dots is not the best of the abilities at that type of development. And so I said, "Okay, I guess I'm Jewish." And I said, put Jewish on my passport. She got very concerned.
Hold on now. I want to take a half step back.
Yes.
Your mother's name was what?
So in Russian, it's Riva Lvovna. It's the most Jewish name you could come up with. It's like Juju name.
Okay, and what about your father?
My father is Russian.
Ah, so your mother is Jewish and your father was Russian. They married. And as far as you were concerned, growing up, do you have any siblings?
I have a sister. I have an older sister.
And I assume she did not know either.
No.
Okay.
No.
And your mother, who was Jewish by birth, lived a Russian life.
Well, lived a Soviet life. Once a year, magically appear burnt inedible matzah, because my mom would bring it from some underground bakery, and she'll tell us,
"Yes,
eat it, it's fine." And she'll light a Yortzeit candle for her mom on the Gregorian calendar date.
Yes.
Because she didn't have access to the Hebrew calendar.
Yes.
So I knew that my mom does these weird things, but it never connected. It never meant anything.
Nor did she ever explain to you why.
Exactly.
Okay. Incidentally, you said you learned when you went to the passport office at 16, but you had an older sister. What happened when she went at 16?
I guess they just put Russian on her passport and that was it.
So when you learned you were Jewish, your sister still didn't know either.
No.
Okay. I want to know what impact that realization had on you. For example, Masha, from that moment on, did you feel any different inside yourself about who you were?
Well, what was interesting is that again, my birthday is in April, it's the end of the school year. The new school year starts, and I go to school and I happily announce to everybody, did you know I'm Jewish? And
Happily, you do this.
huh?
You do this happily.
Happily, correct, happily.
There's
Absolutely happily.
there's no thinking at the time that this somehow is some kind of negative slight against you.
Correct. I was completely oblivious to everything. And there was a change. I could feel that some of my classmates, sort of like started looking at me funny, but I really, somebody said that, Masha, you're like a tank. I just go. And, the first time somebody called me the derogatory, term in Russian, Zhid, they said, oh, you're a Zhidovka. I just looked at them funny and I said, yeah, you're Belarusian. You think you're better?
Good for you. Good for you.
I have to tell you, Mark, if I may interject just for a second, I think growing up without that identity of oppressed is what made a difference in my life and is what is driving me, because I didn't grow up as a minority.
Fascinating. By the way, I should have asked you, what decade or around what year are we talking about that you're 16 and you go to the passport office?
Um, 89, 90.
Okay, so this is still before, for example, Operation Exodus. And in essence, the Jews are still
Right,
prisoners in the former Soviet Union.
correct. Yeah, it was right before.
Okay. I also assume at this point in your life, for example, you did not know any Jewish refuseniks in the former Soviet Union. Was, Sharansky a name you knew or cared about?
No,
Was okay, none of that mattered to you at
none
that
of that.
point. Okay.
Correct,
Um,
correct.
so do you come home to your mother and father and say, how come you never told me I was Jewish?
I did. And listen, my mom is a doctor. She works 2 full-time jobs in Soviet Union. She's either at work or she's sleeping. And it's like, yeah, okay, well, mazal tov. And my dad looked at me funny and he said, yeah, but you're going to start going to a synagogue now? There is none. So what's the difference?
Very
That was the,
interesting.
that was the extent. It's really interesting how successful Soviet Union was in stamping this Jewish identity out of millions of people. There should be a study made.
Interesting. So at what point do you leave the former Soviet Union and come to America, and how does that happen?
We leave the Soviet Union a few years later, and I was the instigator of that. My mom's brother has lived here since the 70s. So I knew that we have relatives in America who would once every couple of years would send us these huge packages with either hand-me-down clothes or some new clothes. And this was like, if I may say on Jewish TV, it's like Christmas morning, right? You get all these gifts.
Yes.
And my uncle finally asked my mom if she would like to come and visit. And magically, I don't know how, the Soviets actually let her go visit. And ever since she came back, I was obsessed with the idea that we need to get out. Not as much for anti-Semitism within the system, because I was not exposed to it when I was growing up, because I was growing up Russian. But I grew up in Minsk. In 1986, there was a big Chernobyl explosion. And because both of my parents have worked in healthcare, I knew of all of the cancers that were happening, of all of the health reasons. And it was for health reasons that I asked and begged my parents. I said, I want to have normal children. Let's get out. And so it took us 5.5, 6 years until we got our visa. And we arrived to the Bay Area because that's where the relatives lived and they sponsored us. And the first few years, I have to say, it's a life of an immigrant. You're not really concerned about any other identity than you just need to figure out how to live in this place. And one thing I did know is I wanted my son to get a Jewish education. I don't know why. My Chabad rabbi laughs and he said, that's your Yiddishkeit. And it was through the Jewish day school. While he was learning, I started learning.
Okay. How many children do you have?
I have 2 children. I have a 23-year-old and a 6-year-old.
Good for you. That's lovely. So let me ask you this. When and how did you begin to have a Zionist identity? At what point do you begin to care so much about Israel?
There were a few points on this journey. And the point number 1 was in that day school, Warnick Day School in Foster City, there was an amazing head of school who every Friday there was a newsletter about the school and he would attach some kind of Israel-related article. And one day he attached an op-ed by Golda Meir from 1974, where she talks about who are the Palestinians. And to me, that was, I didn't know anything about anything, but it planted a seed. And then in 2005, during the disengagement, I was watching YouTube and I was crying my eyes out. And I did not understand what I was seeing. I was seeing Jews dragging other Jews out of homes.
Yes, we're talking about the disengagement in Gaza.
Disengagement in Gaza. There was nothing much on the news. Facebook didn't exist. WhatsApp groups didn't exist. I was craving for information. And I knew that on Labor Day weekend, in 2 weeks, I'm going to go to a Jewish camp in Northern California. There are going to be Jews there. And I will ask those Jews what's happening because they're running a Jewish camp. They must know.
Why are you going to a Jewish camp?
It was a family weekend camp. So I was looking for Jewish immersion experiences for me and for my son. And so I went to the Jewish camp. And unfortunately, those professional Jews didn't care what was happening in Israel.
Yes.
Most of them didn't hear what was happening in Israel. But I really got extremely well understanding of B'Tselem Elohim, because that seemed to be the theme for the weekend. It's a beautiful idea, but it's
like of God.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
you may not have learned about Israel on that trip, but you did begin to learn something profound about Judaism and Torah.
Correct.
Okay. Was it a Chabad camp?
No, it's a non-denominational, it's a very reform-ish type of camp.
And they were certainly not Zionist.
No.
Okay,
no,
keep going.
So that planted another seed. And then the next summer of 2006 is what actually prompted me to learn. At this time, I'm a registered nurse. I work in labor and delivery for many years. And at that time, in that summer of 2006, it was the second Lebanon war or Hezbollah war. And I have family in the north of Israel, and I know that they're running to bomb shelters. Nursing is a funny profession. You could be a nurse and you can go practice somewhere else. So we had a lot of Irish nurses at that time. And Irish identify with the Palestinians. And so one morning I walk into the nurses station, and there are 3 Irish nurses who are not afraid to discuss politics or God or the salaries, unlike Americans.
Yes.
And they're discussing what is happening in the Middle East. And basically it's one big session of Israel bashing. And I stand there and I realize that I have no language, I have no knowledge, and I know that what they're saying is not right, but I can't say anything about it. And then my coworker, this amazing person, Diana Karanteng, she floats into the nurses station. You have to understand, this is a woman from Ghana who got her education in London. So she has this perfect posture. She knows who she is. She's sure of herself. She's blacker than black. She comes into the nurses station and she breaks down all of their arguments. She gives them historical, archaeological, biblical, moral arguments. My jaw drops and I'm embarrassed. I am impressed, and I say, okay, this is time to learn. Mm-hmm. And this is when I started learning. And the more you learn the story of Israel, the more you understand the story of the Jewish people. How could you not believe in miracles? How could you not get amazingly obsessed about it? And at the same time, somewhere, this idea of justice, right? Tzedek, tzedek, tirdof. That's what our left friends love to say, but they forget the second line. The second line is, it's justice, justice you shall pursue, so you may occupy the land that I give you. Somehow that is forgotten.
You're right. You're right.
So the benefit of my Soviet upbringing is that Soviets did a great job of raising justice warriors. We were concerned about Nicaragua and Cuba and Africa. You think intersectionality is new? It's not. It's called internationalism. It's an old, good Soviet idea. It's all Soviet propaganda. So I knew that I needed to do something. And at the same time, my son was in a Hebrew day school, Jewish day school. He was in a Hebrew Sunday school. He was preparing for his bar mitzvah, and he comes home, and this was probably 2011 by that time. He comes home and he said, Mom, our teacher showed us a very anti-Semitic movie in a Hebrew Sunday school. And I go, well, did she frame it? Did she say that, blah, blah, blah? And she goes, no, it was an extremely anti-Israel movie. And at that time, by that time in my house, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. We don't parse words.
I understand.
And I said, this cannot be right. Our synagogue is super pro-Israel. Our rabbi talks about support of Israel every single Shabbat. That cannot happen. I start watching the film, and I have to tell you, this is a film that is promoted by PBS, that they have a whole curricula around it. And if you don't know anything about Middle East or Israel, you will walk away thinking that the scariest thing in Israel are the Haredis at the Kotel, that Israeli soldiers shoot Arab children just for fun, and that Palestinians are ridiculously oppressed every single day. Arab citizens.
This was a PBS movie?
This is a PBS movie. It's called The Promises.
The Promises.
The Promises.
But isn't that horrific, Masha?
It is horrific. It is horrific. So that's why I contact the synagogue, the school there, the rabbi. And what I learned is very simple. There is a profound lack of trained professional Jewish educators. So the synagogues will hire whoever they can, whoever could fill the spot. And she was a really nice Israeli woman who really did not understand why this movie is so out of context for Jewish American kids. So there's a lot of well-meaning people, but well-meaning is not going to help us.
A very important story. Good for you. By the way, have you ever been to Israel?
I've now been to Israel many times. I don't know how many, 10, 11, 12.
Okay. And so you've experienced Israel yourself, and it's one thing to learn about it. And many American Jews think they know a lot about it, but there's nothing like being like firsthand experience. And I'm assuming when you went to Israel, no matter what you knew or felt about Israel, it broadened and enlarged, and in some way it did mean something to you. Am I correct?
Absolutely. I mean, it's the only place where we travel now. Absolutely.
So if you remember, what did you feel the very first time you were in Israel?
Okay, I don't want to sound like a cliche, but home. I felt like home, with tiny little dirty elevators and people yelling at each other and pushing and shoving. And at the end, it's like, it's my people. It's mine. I'll tell you the funniest story. My uncle who lives in Haifa, he took me and my son Philip. He took us around to show Haifa. We were driving, and he got into a car accident. The two cars were merging, and they hit each other, right? And it could be like a comedy skit, right? So he gets out of the car, the guy in the other car gets out of the car. They start arguing. The police come, and here come three. It's like three stooges. I'm telling you, the three policemen. They were really funny. They're just like, and they're yelling, and the hands are going up and down, and I'm like, I'm getting scared, and all of a sudden they're hugging, and I'm like, this is bizarre. This is the most bizarre place in the world. But that is Israel. That is Israel.
It's family, isn't it?
Yeah.
It saddens me, and I don't mean this in a condescending way. It just saddens me that so many American Jews, and Jews who are caring American Jews, have never experienced Israel. And it means that they're missing out on something extraordinary that is part of them. Yes?
Absolutely. What is incredible is that, listen, I worked in healthcare for 17 years. For 17 years, I worked in critical care unit. I took care of moms and their babies, and I actually miss it still. And I can tell you, more of my non-Jewish coworkers have gone to Israel on trips than my Jewish coworkers. And that is sad.
It
That
is
is very
sad.
sad.
It is sad. All right, so here's how your own feelings for Israel develop, how your Zionist identity develops. While this is happening, I assume you're living with your son in your own home, so you're not living with your parents, correct?
Correct, yes.
Did they have any reaction, however, to the extent, to the fact that Zionism in Israel was becoming important to their daughter?
My mom is one of 8 children. Everybody married Jews. Everybody had children with Jews except my mom. And I became the biggest Jew, quote unquote, of the family. So it's a little funny. I think a lot of my family was sort of like a little bit like, oh, it's a little thing that will pass. Oh, it's a little thing. Now they're incredibly proud of me. Now,
Wonderful. That's wonderful to hear.
yeah.
Do you celebrate Jewish holidays together?
Yes. My Russian dad now knows more about Rosh Hashanah probably than average American Jew. Yes.
And what's Passover like in your family?
It's not as long, but it's a real Passover. We read the Haggadah, and I actually, on my many trips from Israel, I brought Russian Haggadah, in Russian, so we can read it together. My parents are in their 80s, and it's a beautiful tradition that they are learning. We're all learning together, and we're all forming it together.
Good for you. So, Masha, what's your sense of the way American Jewish adults, well, we'll talk about teens in a moment, But what's your sense of how American Jewish adults understand the realities of Israel?
They don't understand the reality of Israel. They only have one lens, and they have the lens of living in a Western society with neighbors who don't threaten to kill them every 5 minutes. That's the only lens they have. That's the only education they've had. And most American Jews have never really spent time in a totalitarian country or any third world country with a lens of, oh, I'm here to rescue you for 2 weeks. But what is it actually like to live there? So no, they have no idea.
All right. You also emphasize the word Zionism in your work. You know, in some ways, the word Zionism does not seem to be embraced today in the Jewish community, in part because those who hate Israel use the word Zionism in a derogatory manner. What's your sense also of the way American Jews feel about Zionism as a commitment to a sovereign Jewish state?
I don't think they understand it. I think many American Jews think that Zionism means making Aliyah. And in 2020,
Right.
in 2010, and in 2000, it was not about making Aliyah. It's about defending who you are. That's what it's about.
And you're saying many American Jews don't understand that.
No, they don't.
It saddens me also that Zionism has become a word that some Jews feel apologetic about. And it really represents a nationalist movement, which, if it were any other people, American Jews would celebrate. It's ironic, isn't it?
Correct. They will be at the forefront of the barricades. They'll build the barricades and they'll be at the forefront of them.
Exactly right.
But
Okay.
it goes back to the Jewish education that is sorely lacking. The Jewish education cannot start with Tikkun Olam and end with tzedakah. We can't. That's the only two Jewish values that are being taught in many American Jewish institutions.
Mhm. What should be taught?
We should teach that Jews are from Judea. This is not a controversial statement. And yet, the pushback that I have when I state it from the Jews is unbelievable.
Give me an example.
I'll give you an example. I was asked to facilitate a speaker at a Jewish high school here in the Bay Area. And we brought in Gloria Greenfield, who's a movie maker, and it was for Itzhak Rabin's Yortzeit. And she talked about Itzhak Rabin, and she showed a clip of her film, The Case for Israel. And she mentioned that Itzhak Rabin never talked about separating Jerusalem or, seceding any kind of territories. At some point, the head of school got extremely upset, and he kept talking about the occupation that Israel is perpetrating against the Palestinians. And I asked for the microphone, and I asked the kids a simple question: where do Jews come from? And I walked them to realize that the West Bank is Judea, and they're called Jews because they're from that area, they're from Judea, and that in fact, you are unable to be an occupier in your own land. I practically was banned from coming back to the school. But there's a Russian. This wouldn't be my interview if I didn't bring something in Russian. There's a Russian expression, Soros from being too smart.
Say it in Russian.
Горе от ума.
And it means trouble that comes to you because you're too smart.
Yeah, you're too smart. You analyze too much. And it's a problem with the Jews that we have, right? And I'm not saying black and white, but I'm saying that every shade of gray will eventually end in black or white. And eventually you'll need to make a stand. And this is the time to make that stand. This is a time to stand up for yourself. I tell our teens who live 7,000 or 5,000 miles away from Israel that this is not about Israel. The anti-Israel movement that is happening in their classrooms every day, it has nothing to do with Israel. I don't know of any Israeli who wakes up in the morning worried if some American Jewish kid is going to stand up for Israel on their college campus. And I know a lot of Israelis. They're not worried. It's a magnificent, strong country that could defend itself, Baruch Hashem. However, what it's about defending who they are. Because if they're attacking Israel, that means they will attack the Jews. And if you proudly identify as a Jew, they will attack you the first chance they get. And it's not about having the mentality of being scared. No, but you should A, know what you're proud of, and B, be able to articulate it and defend who you are.
All right. So this is the perfect time to ask you, how did you come to create Club Z? When did you do this, and why did you do this?
So I'm going to go back to that incident from the synagogue when I realized that, they don't have a curriculum. I asked, what do you need? They said, we need a curriculum. I said, great. Okay, give me time. I'll find you a curriculum. There are more Jewish studies, Israel studies curricula than there are stars in the world. It took me half a day. And I'm so excited. And I called them and I said, beautiful, I found your curriculum. It cost, I think, $100. And it comes with 1-day training session. You have to fly the teacher to New York for 1 day. And then it has a year-long online support.
Do you remember which organization was sponsoring this?
Yes, it was the Old David Project, and the curriculum was called Israel in Jewish Identity.
Okay.
Perfect.
Perfect.
Perfect. I was so excited.
Mitsuyan, go ahead, keep going. Очень хорошо. Go ahead.
Очень хорошо. And I was told that the synagogue needs to form a committee, and the committee needs to meet and approve. And I said, great, how long is it going to take? Because the class starts in 6 weeks. And they said it's going to take, a year or two. And I don't have a year or two.
No.
And so I ended up having the curriculum. It's 7 lectures. And I'm thinking to myself, listen, I'm a nurse. I birth babies for a living. I could do this. If I could teach breastfeeding, I could teach this. And so our local JCC was extremely generous enough to give me free space. I told my son, find some friends. And the idea was, I'm just going to do these 7 lectures and be done.
And which city are we talking about?
We were in Palo Alto.
Okay, keep going.
And here's what happens. What happens with these kids is what happened with me. The more you learn about Israel, the more you're going to want to know. The more they were meeting, the more they were asking to meet more. At first, we were supposed to meet once a month on my weekend off. Then it was every other week. Then they asked, could we please meet every week? And I go, guys, I work full time. But it formed the nucleus of the group. And these kids never went away. They kept coming back year after year. And I started bringing speakers, and I started doing immersive experiences where we would go and we would have a retreat in the woods, and they'll hang out. And people kept asking for more and more. How
did you give them more? You had only studied yourself these 7.
I would study like crazy. I would prepare for every lesson. It'll take me tens of hours to prepare for each lesson.
I understand completely. Give us an example, if you can remember. If you can't, it's okay. But if you remember, if you can, give us an example of one of the initial 7, and then give us an example of how you expanded on the original 7, And, if you took kids away into the woods, what'd you do with them? And by the way, the story is, on the one hand, it's revelatory. On the other hand, it is almost unbelievable. It's something most American Jewish communities just have never had the experience of, where there are kids in their own communities begging for more information, more learning, more experiencing this study of Israel. And so it's very exciting. Bo and Masha, I give you personal credit. And this is true all the time. You need the professionals who create the structure. In this instance, this 7-prong curriculum from the David Project. But it also is always about the dynamism and the charisma and the excitement of the teacher. And, when my kids went off to school, I always said to them, follow the teacher. Get yourself some professor who is outstanding. No matter what the subject is, that professor will make the subject exciting and interesting, and you'll become interested in it. The same is true here. And so I am positive that part of the enthusiasm that came out of what you were doing was a reflection of how you, the teacher, the facilitator, was making it possible. So kol hakavod to you. But I come back to my question. Give me an example, if you can, of one of the original 7 curricular themes, and then give us an example of how you then expanded on it, ultimately doing this on a weekly basis.
The curriculum was split into geography. It started with Jewish pride, and then it went, I think, north, south, east, west, Jerusalem.
Okay, did you say Jewish pride?
Jewish pride. That was the first lesson.
And what does that mean? How do you teach Jewish pride?
The curriculum talked about various accomplishments that Israel has done for the world and also for the Jews. And I think it's important. It's important to start with that. What happened when we got to the south and we start talking about Sderot is inevitably I had to talk about Gaza and disengagement. And that it lends itself to keep talking more and more and more. I've brought in a lot of people, right? So I Skyped in before there was Zoom, a friend of mine who was working, now he's the CEO of Honest Reporting, Daniel Pomerantz. And he did a whole session with them on the history of Gaza and why what's happening there now happening.
And your students were interested?
Oh, no, absolutely. Absolutely.
Why? This is so atypical.
No, it's not atypical. It's actually very typical. I go where students want to go. Why? I will tell you why. Because they are soaking in that. It's on their social media and it's in their classrooms. It's blaring at them from TV and radios. They're soaking in it. And once they realize that they're Jews and that this is about them, then they want to know. And also, they want to be treated with respect. They want to have serious conversations. They want to be taken seriously. And we afford that. We take them seriously. I treat them as, mini adults, if you will.
Okay, now this was as part of the story about how did you come to create Club Z? So pick that up.
I started looking around for a program that would educate teens about this. And what I saw was there were some offerings of Band-Aids. What I mean is there's an offering of, okay, we'll do a 2-session or a 3-session workshop about this or that. It's little, when we are hemorrhaging, Band-Aid is not going to help. what I was also seeing, I live in San Francisco Bay Area. This is the birthplace of every anti-Israel Jewish movement. And so I was looking at a young lady. Her name is Ray Abele. She was a prize of the Jewish community. She did Teen Fellowship, which is a premier philanthropy program. She was a dealer teen, which is another philanthropy program of the Jewish community. She went to summer camp. She went to Israel on teen trips. What does she do? She joins Code Pink and becomes a prominent leader there. Simone Zimmerman, who came to Berkeley to be a pro-Israel activist, after one semester, she co-founds If Not Now. And I wanted to know why. Why does this happen? Why does Jewish community and the parents do everything they're supposed to do? They send their kids to the Jewish institutions. They invest heavily into education of these teens. Why are they turning completely anti-Israel, completely against themselves, common sense, anything sane? And so I started doing the opposite. I started saying, you know what? We have to talk about the conflict. Did you know that the story of the Maccabees is not taught in American Jewish schools? It's not taught because, oh, it's too controversial. The story of the Maccabees is controversial. And here come I, completely outside of the establishment, like a bull in a china shop. I don't understand nonprofit world. I don't understand double speak. I speak medical language, which is extremely direct and sometimes not particularly nice. But if I diagnose a problem and I see a treatment, I will do that. And so I thought, we're sending our kids to a hostile environment. At that time, I was volunteering with a very small organization. It's a Bay Area based nonprofit that works with students from Berkeley, Stanford, and UC Santa Cruz. And what we did is we funded small funds, we funded pro-Israel students. Students are not the best at planning. Sometimes they'll forget in their grant application that they need another $300 for pizza or another $500 for t-shirts. So this is where we would come in and we'll just write them a check. It's easy. But there was one catch. The catch was, I want to know what you're doing. I want to be on campus. I want to meet with you regularly. And when I started doing that, I realized these are bright students who want to do great things, who know nothing about the conflict and about Israel. They could spend 13 years in a Jewish, from kindergarten to 12th grade.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't understand what 67 is for the Jews, the fact that we're still fighting the war of 48. They don't understand what occupation means. They don't have that language. They talk about cherry tomatoes. And they don't understand why people are upset. Like, you're planting your cherry tomatoes on my land. You're a thief. And so we need to prepare our children. We need to first inoculate them. We need to give them the vaccine. And that vaccine is Zionism. And we need to spell it out to them. And then we need to arm them with facts, with skills, but most importantly, with confidence. They have to be able to understand that even if they don't know something, they have a home front, and we're there and we're going to help them.
That is wonderful. You described how you are not part of the Jewish establishment. How has the Jewish establishment responded to what you're doing?
At first, with dismissal and laughter. Literally, you're crazy. Teenagers, they're the hardest population. You want to start a teenage program about Zionism? Why would they need that? They don't need that. I'd like to think that I've earned their respect by now. I'm building great relationships, and I think we're teaching each other and we're learning from each other. But I think it's easier to break into Italian mafia than into Jewish establishment of nonprofits.
I understand. Well, good for you. I have one question of a philosophical nature, and I would love to hear your answer. I first am introduced to you because of your involvement in this effort to stop Zoom from holding a webinar by Leila Khaled, who is a known terrorist who was involved in hijackings. She was the first woman hijacker. She was involved in Black September, which was responsible for the Munich 11. And so I come to know you because I see you're part of the group that convinced Zoom not to allow her to have a webinar. And I have a philosophical question. I am a fanatic when it comes to the First Amendment and free speech. And I believe it is one of the reasons why America has been so good for the Jews, that the Jewish people have flourished here, is because of the Bill of Rights, which talk about no establishment of a state religion, and which allow freedom of assembly, and which allow free speech. And so the question I have is, while I am repulsed by Leila Khaled and what she stands for, how do I deny her the right to have a webinar where she has the right to teach anything she believes in, if I also will fight for the right for you, Masha, to hold your webinar on Zoom and to teach anything you believe is true? So I'm asking you, how do you handle that philosophical question for you? In retrospect, is it the right thing to do for Jews to limit free speech when the free speech is PLO oriented?
I'll give you a few answers. Answer number one is that terrorists don't get First Amendment rights. They don't. If it was Osama bin Laden, I don't think anybody would have questioned, does he have a right to speak to American audiences? Number two, Leila Khaled is not allowed to step a foot on American soil. She would not be allowed, she's not allowed to step a foot on most civilized countries. She would not have that opportunity to speak. So why would a private corporation give her a platform to do what? To justify her terrorism? Very few people know that she went through 6 plastic surgeries to change her face so that security would not recognize her. This is a committed terrorist. No, she doesn't get the right of free speech. My second answer is that we, the Jews, need to start doing what works. Writing letters, writing strongly worded petitions, and asking for authorities to do something is not working. We've been doing this for years. I'm tired of strongly written letters. Okay, great, let me file it somewhere. What works is putting pressure on private corporations and even on certain individuals to do the right thing. If they cannot see what the right thing to do, I will drag them and I will show them.
Good for you. And I appreciate both answers, very articulate. Okay, so Masha, if somebody watching right now wants to be in touch with you or in some way to get their, and it's 8th grade through 12th grade, their child into Club Z, what do they do?
They go to our website, clubz.org, and they sign up. That's as easy as it is. We are in San Francisco Bay Area, in Los Angeles, in New York, in Charlotte, and I'll be happy to open more chapters. The only way we bring more chapters if there is a strong support, if people ask for it. We only go where we are invited to.
Well, I said it before, I'll say it again. It's both Mazal Tov and Kol HaKavod to you. I mean, you are a very impressive person. It has been an honor for me to meet you. I hope that now that we know each other, there will be many opportunities for me to bring you on to JBS and do things with you. I want you to know if there's ever something you want the American Jewish community, and there are many non-Jews who watch JBS as well. We are nationwide and we're global online. You have an open microphone here. You have an access to spread the kind of message you right now are bringing to teens, but I think you're bringing it to all of us. So thank you. It has been an absolute joy. And I just adore everything you're doing, and I adore you. And I hope there are many opportunities for us to do something again together in the near future.
Thank you so much, Mark. Truly, truly a pleasure. Very much appreciated.
The thoughts and insights of Masha Merkulova, founder and executive director of Club Z, an organization seeking to provide teens with a way to connect to Israel, Jewish history, and Zionism. As always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have to any of the ideas expressed on this edition of L'Chaim. Remember, you can email me at rabbigolub@jbstv.org, or you can write me at Post Office Box 360, Stamford, Connecticut, 06904. And remember, you can also listen to the L'Chaim podcast, which you can download wherever you download your podcasts. And so until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'Chaim, my friends, to life.
L'Chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, Post Office Box 360, Stamford, Connecticut 06904. Or you can call the JBS Pledge Line at 833-MY-JBS-TV. That's 833-695-2788. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. We thank you for your kind support.